Good, but that is more or less the norm. The first speaker on this panel, whom I'd like to introduce, is Fiamma Nirenstein. Seems to be some dispute going on, but I'm sure that's resolved. Fiamma Nirenstein divides her time between Jerusalem and Rome. And she's a feature writer for La Stampa and a senior journalist, Panorama, and a person who's won many journalistic and literary awards. I would particularly like to emphasize a number of books of hers which are relevant to this conference and to this session. Actually, I can say I did read two of these books, or at least in part, even though they're in Italian, and I have to admit that my Italian is not far from perfect and far from fluent, but Fiamma I can understand. And so I'll begin with the two that I have read in part. L'abbandono, come l'Occidente ha tradito gli ebrei, which has appeared in English, correct?
It's a mix of two books, this one and Gli Antisemiti Progressisti.
Yeah, okay. So that would be, in English, that would be Abandonment, How the West Betrayed the Jews, which appeared with Rizzoli in 2002. The second book, which is particularly relevant to this morning's session, Gli Antisemi Progressisti, which is in English now. And I think we all understand what that means. But in English, the title is slightly different. Terror, the New Antisemitism, and the War Against the West. I should also like to mention, because it was a bestseller, indeed, all of Fiamma's works, as far as I know, are bestsellers in Italy, was an interview conducted with Bernard Lewis called Islam, la guerra e la speranza. Islam, the war, and hope. Fiamma frequently appears on television and radio. She has her own show on Italian television, on Foreign Affairs. She's published in many well-known magazines and journals, as well as newspapers. I actually first came across her work maybe 5-6 years ago in commentary. I remember an article in particular about how terrorist bombers are made. And the most recent work, which I like to mention, came out in 2004, La Sabbia di Gaza. So, without further ado, Fiamma, please, the platform is yours.
Well, thank you, Robert. When I heard you speaking about me, I thought I really did not recognize myself. Maybe you're speaking about somebody else. I will try. I won't try a descriptive way, because I'm sure that here it's very well understood and known, all the works of my two co-speakers of this morning, which really describe the phenomena of multiculturalism, anti-Semitism, and globalization. They are really maestri for me, and so I leave all the floor. I will try a more polemic approach, if you allow me. Now, I ask myself this ridiculous old question: is multiculturalism, thank you, good for the Jews? Theoretically, it is, because it is a concept where the possibility of cultures, national identity, religions to live side by side is included. But this definition doesn't work today. Multiculturalism has become something completely different. At the end of the day, after some thought, my answer is multiculturalism has nothing to do with the Jews today from two different points of view. The first is the relationship between the Jews and Europe, and more precisely between Jews and Western civilization, has to do very little with multiculturalism. They do not represent either an ethnic group, not a religious group, not a cultural group. We are speaking about something else, and I will come to it in a moment. Anyhow, I feel like a big mistake for the Jews themselves to feel like they want to be part of a multicultural scheme of the modern society. And most of all, to think that that is the way to win anti-Semitism. I will explain why in a second. The second, the multiculturalism of today is not even multiculturalism. It's a clash between the Western culture and the Islamic identity, with its requests and tough demands and claims toward our culture. It's no more the problem of difference or welcoming the stranger. The modern society are not even multicultural society. Culture don't try to live side to side and melt where it's possible. Multiculturalism is a screen that covers our denial that the Muslim immigrants, for a very relevant part, do not have any wish of living side by side or unless it's in the dimension of dhimmi. This is something that Yאור will explain much better than I. And they despise our culture and they want to beat it. Only in the USA, where they became part of the country, there is something that you can call multiculturalism. And this is why you ask yourself so many times at the beginning, what is the difference between multiculturalism in the United States and in the rest of the world? This is the difference. The difference is that the state there is not ready to pay the ideological price of renouncing its identity for the sake of pleasing or appeasing a different cultural group. Now, in Europe, the relationship with other groups but the Islamic group are fringe phenomena. Any other relationship in Europe with any other culture or religion is a function of the relationship with Islam. Well, I hope you understand that I'm not speaking all in all of all the Islamic presence in Europe. I'm speaking about the Islamist presence that gives the tone, gives the note, gives the sense of what is going on now in Europe. In fact, the most outstanding and new kind of relationship with the Jews today in Europe has become anti-Semitism. This is the newest thing relating to the new phenomena. It's too heavy a price for us but to pay, and it's too heavy a price to pay for multiculturalism if this is a shameful anti-Semitism. If the price has to be 60 years after the Holocaust, the indecent denial of the Shoah, the comparison of Nazi to the Jews, just in the land of the Shoah and the Nazi, if this has to become a serious matter of discussion, if we have to have Nobel Prize like Saramago, or intellectuals well known like Theodorakis, or plenty of historians and intellectuals or politicians, to have normal relationship like one of the member of the new government with organization like the Hezbollah or Hamas or with Ahmadinejad. Well, look, my feeling is just like you speak to cannibals, you know. You can go to a cannibal and discuss his relationship with his mother, for instance, or with his tribe. It would be very interesting. Still, he's a cannibal. And when I'm talking to Ahmadinejad, in my view, this is what we accept. We accept to speak with cannibals. This is what we are doing today, and this is the price we are paying. That to Jews, that was something that you could not say in Italy or in Europe before, has become a common shout in demonstration. Beating Jews, desecrating cemeteries, finding in the polls, in the European polls, that Israel is the most dangerous country in the world, and whatsoever, has become something usual. If somebody would have told me 20 years ago when I was a young woman, I would have laughed about it. It's something completely new. Europe's relationship with itself in front of the new guest is flooded of sense of guilt and fear, so that the European culture became not a cornerstone of civilization in a benevolent position to the other, which is the most real true thing to do, but a frightened, invaded, threatened guest that answers according to its fear. Now let's go back to multiculturalism itself. Jews are not part of a multicultural society. They are not guests of the Christian civilization. They are protagonists of the building of the Judeo-Christian democratic humanistic set of values. They are the inventors of the Western values, and when they consider themselves like immigrants, they do wrong to themselves and to our civilization. A couple of years ago, after a series of episodes connected to terrorism and criminality, somebody in Italy proposed to ask for fingerprints of a certain group of new immigrants. And an Italian Jew, very famous journalist and close friend to Romano Prodi, that now helped him on very much in organizing his campaign, declared that if the law would have been approved, then all the Jews would have to line in front of the office and pretend to give their fingerprint too. I declare that I will never give my fingerprint unless there is a specific reason for that. In another big TV occasion, still of this guy, there was a big accusation in Italy going on about gypsies kidnapping children. Now, I don't want to go into it if it was true or not. But the results of a big discussion that lasted 2 hours was that nowadays gypsies were condemned by the public opinion with the same mental process that the Jews were condemned before the Second World War, which of course was not true, and I'm not going to go into it because it's easy to understand what I mean. The prejudice about the Jews has a completely different phenomenology and deep meaning today. The fascist refusal of the Jews as an inferior race has left a large space for a leftist, reiterated and blind refusal of Israel, a continuous use of double standards, a large use of conspiracy theories and blood libels. You can see them in all the very last episodes of The Last Days about the beach of Gaza. And I promise that I'm not going to go into it. Otherwise, I will make it too long. But if there will be a question, of course, I will answer to it. And I promise that if now, as unfortunately it seems the case, there will be an escalation of violence due to the very patent reason that Hamas came into power and all the jihadist front is compacting and becoming very dangerous from the north to the south, well, what will be said in Europe is that Israel is to blame for that. This is exactly what happened after the Camp David, the summit where Arafat refused the offers of Barak. When he came back and did like this, all Europe, when the terrorist attack started, was on his side and blamed Sharon. Even 1 year and a half after the start of the first attack, there was the Operation Defensive Shield. How did we get to this point? I think that this is the result of a long-standing relationship between the European liberal left point of view that I have been for a long time, and I still consider myself being part of, and the Shoah and the Jews. I think that the Jews themselves have a lot of responsibility in this process. There is a burning wish in the Italian Jews to be identified with the poor and the weak, and I think there are two reasons for that. The first, non-Zionist Judaism, since the end of the Second World War, imagines to belong intrinsically, they say ontologically. This is what the president of the Italian community says, that the Jews belong ontologically to the left, and he said this before the election. the Jewish identity is everywhere in the history of the Western world. And what keeps the Jewish people connected to make it survive is a moral priority whose roots can be found in the Bible, in the Talmud, in the Midrash, and whose outcome can today be found in the mind and the books of all the Western civilization. And that certainly has much to do with democracy and the Declaration of Human Rights. It creates it, and it's not all in it. Judaism creates modernity, but it's not containable in it. It's the root of it. Judaism doesn't look for feeling comfortable in the modern world, doesn't have revendication. Its problems are his problems. Judaism doesn't join the Western culture, doesn't oppose it or enjoy it, just creates it. Europe wouldn't be the same continent without the Judeo-Christian creation of human rights and separation within church and state. Personally, Jews are separated from the others, but are connected. And when I was small, I knew that I was Italian, and this made a great difference. And I didn't have anything else but love toward Italy, since I was born there. It was part of my nerves and blood. But I was, and I am, first and foremost Jew. It's a mystery how it go together, but it goes together, and it doesn't create a problem. It doesn't take anything from being Italian. It adds to be Italian. I'm a very real Florentine, but I always felt, even in front of anti-Semitism, like an identity gift, and identity is really the best thing that can happen to a human being to have, you know. That's the problem of our contemporary history, to be looking for identity. That was the best thing that was given to me. Now, having said that, I put now down, then I go back to the left, the hypothesis that the current anti-Semitism is an expression of the general crisis of values that storms the old continent, that creates the free fall of demography, a sense of unwinnable moral weakness, an uncertainty about the pillar institutions of the West, like marriage, birthright, good and bad. The promotion of way of life that includes genital mutilation, you know, that in hospitals they perform it routinely as a matter of help to multiculturalism, polygamy, even honor murders, tribal logic, lies about the real nature of the phenomena. Well, let's go to the left. So this is the hypothesis that there is anti-Semitism because of the denial of the crisis that the West is in from the point of view of the referring values, and this is generated by the fear of terrorism. And I will go to that at the end. When I was very small, to be Jewish meant foremost to be a victim of Nazi fascism. In my family, we had many victims of Nazi fascism, either from my mother's side, my grandmother's brothers, a wealthy and fully Italian Florentine antiquarians family, fished in their life in Auschwitz, and from my father's, that from Baranov in Poland, they ended up in Sobibor. But my father, in 1939, took the way to the Jewish Yishuv in Palestine, and in 1945 came to Italy with the Brigada that fought with the British to liberate the peninsula from the Nazi-fascist, how do you say that, Jogo. Well, my mother was a partisan. Both of them are still alive and well, Baruch Hashem. They were communist, and my name, Fiamma, is a reminiscence of their resistential attitude. The Jewish soldier wanted to give freedom back to Europe. My mother fought for freedom on the mountains with the partisans. Freedom and democracy in my life have been the antidote prescribed for fascism. They embraced the wounded Jewish identity in my family and in all the Jewish family in Europe. They were the homeland for the Jews wounded by the Shoah. My trademark has been the one of a child born in time of freedom after the Shoah, thanks to the anti-fascist forces, to the leftist forces at the time. And I'll go now deep in the relationship between anti-fascism and left, but it was quite patent, even if today there are lots of discussions, historiographical discussion about it, but At the time, it was quite clear. Even all the discussion about the Soviet Union was not yet there. It was not yet there. So for the Jewish, it was quite clear that you had to join the one of the side of the Cold War. So to make a long story short, this was the feeling of most of the surviving European Jews. Their new homeland was the ideology of the forces that fought for liberty and human rights against what? Against the right, against fascism, against. That was, and so their new home, their new identity of the Jews, the big change, the turning point of the identity of the Jews there is the left. The left has been the new identity of the Jew in the Second World War in Western Europe. Never mind if it was true or not. The integration in the European society of the surviving Jews, the real new multiculturalism. This is really new multiculturalism. The choice of a new culture to become part of Europe as it was after the Second World War. Yes, 5 minutes, so I have to jump. Yeah. I myself remember trying to perform on all my youth an identity that would be agreeable, penetrable, transparent, and not alien to my friends. I was part, of all of this ethnic Jewish literature that in Italy had a big expansion, and that was connected to the press house of Adelphi. That was where the shtetl Jew and the shtetl identity of the Jews was really shown as the basic way to understand the Jews, an ethnic, cultural, food, smells, clothes identity, which has nothing really to do with the Jew. When Natalia Ginzburg, yes, you know about Natalia Ginzburg, a big, famous writer, read the manuscript as a professional reader of the press house Einaudi, read the Primo Levi, Se questo è un uomo manuscript, refused the manuscript because she said that this manuscript Judaized too much the Holocaust. The Holocaust had to be lived as a fight between good and bad, yes, between the Nazi beast and the good that was represented by the parties and by the Soviet Union at the time, and whatsoever. Now, if I have 3 minutes more, I really have to throw away all of my papers and to try to summarize in a few words. And I apologize for being too long. Since 1967 onward, this choice of the Jews to be part of the left has entered in the terrible contradiction of the choice of the left to be completely anti-Israeli. I won't describe here because I don't have the time, but I listed down here plenty and plenty of episodes that show how extreme, really extreme, was the choice of being anti-Israeli since the 6 Days War. And since when the Jews decided that from being a weak Jew, the one that Primo Levi and Natalia Ginzburg declared to prefer folded down on the prayer books and in the shtetl, decided to become what they called the Santan weapon arm Jew of Israel. Since then onward, the struggle against this kind of Jew has been tough, has been strong, has been terrible, and I cannot but use adjectives because I don't have the time to list down the episodes, but I swear that they are all listed in my books, and also I have them here. If you ask about them, I can make you a list. After September 11, things have become even tougher, and this anti-Israelianism has become intertwined and connected to anti-Americanism. And there is no way that you can win it. You cannot win this kind of anti-Semitism because it's connected with the crisis of value of Europe, as I tried to describe at the beginning, a denial of Europe itself to itself. It's not that they deny the Jews, they deny the founding values of Europe itself. So this is the first point, and this is the most important maybe. And the second point is fear. Is fear of this presence which is becoming overwhelming, which is becoming widespread, and that suggests a new kind of behavior, new kind of laws. So the only way to try to make this thing change, to fight anti-Semitism in Europe, is to go into a struggle for values, and to go into a struggle for being standing toughly against terrorism. And these are the only two things that can be done. Because, and this is my last sentence, Robert, as anti-Semitism has been, we would say in Italian, la mosca cocchiera. How would you say that, la mosca cocchiera? Mosca cocchiera, in front of the face of the horse that ran, and the horse runs after the fly. You should know that in French. Mosca cocchiera.
La mouche du coche.
The mouche du coche. Of Hitler's attempt to conquer Europe. So anti-Semitism is the mosca cocchiera of the present terrorism and the destruction of the Western values. So it cannot be fought, it cannot be won, but in this perspective. Okay, this is
We will take the questions at the end of this session. I think now you'll all understand why I asked Fiamma to open the session, because in the morning people tend to be somewhat drowsy, just trying to, focus, and there's nothing quite like hearing this fiery Italian to get us all fully awakened. La mosca cocchiera, is that the phrase? I must remember that. Very colourful metaphor. Our next speaker is Dr. Manfred Gerstenfeld, who is Chairman of the Board of Fellows of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, also editor of a publication, Jewish Political Studies Review, and co-publisher of a book that I can certainly recommend, Post-Holocaust and Antisemitism. Indeed, he's been very active in directing the Jerusalem Center's project on this subject. Actually, Manfred has a very interesting previous life. He's had two separate lives as far as I can tell. Oh, at least three. But in an earlier incarnation, he was an international business strategist, and he has a background in chemistry, economics, and environmental studies. Indeed, a number of his works, earlier writings related to the relationship between Judaism, environmentalism, and the environment in the Jewish tradition, which is a rather neglected subject. But in this previous life, he was a board member of several public companies, including leading investment companies. So perhaps that was a good preparation for what we are about to hear. I would like to mention two or three more recent works which are directly connected with the subject, not only of this conference, but of this session. One which I actually didn't know it was in English as well. I must have seen it in the French version. The New Cloth, is that it? The New Cloth?
That's only in French, that's what you were in.
This was written here in English. It sounded strange to me. The New Cloth of Antisemitism, Les Nouveaux Habits de l'Antisémitisme. Yeah. And I'd like to mention Europe's Crumbling Myths, the post-Holocaust origins of today's anti-Semitism, and finally a forthcoming work about the autumn 2005 riots in France and their possible impact on Israel and the Jews. When's that coming out?
Last week.
Right, okay, are there any copies out there?
No, but I'll give you a copy.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thanks, Robert, for your kind remarks. Thanks, Fiamma, for balancing yesterday's lecture on Italy. A technical remark first. A technical remark first. Those of you who have read my abstract, the last paragraph doesn't belong to me. Please cross that paragraph out. It comes from Eurab's lecture and has, in one way or the other, been put into my text. The 2nd of November 2004 is an important date in the recent history of the Netherlands. In Amsterdam, on that day, a radical Muslim, Mohammed Bouyeri, shot the filmmaker Theo van Gogh a number of times with a pistol. He then pulled out a knife and started cutting off the dying man's head. Thereafter, Bouyeri stuck a second knife with a letter into Van Gogh's body. This highly anti-Semitic text contained threats against several Dutch politicians. Among these were the well-known liberal parliamentarian of Somalian origin, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and Job Cohen, the socialist mayor of Amsterdam, who is Jewish. After the murder, Bouyeri fled. He tried to kill on the way a few policemen. Finally, one of them wounded him. The murder of Van Gogh, in fact, in our thinking, was the cruel killing of one private person by another, of which there are 200 plus in the Netherlands every year. Many in Dutch society, however, saw it differently. There were major public gatherings in memory of the filmmaker, and in the same months, November 2004, there were more than 100 attacks against mosques, Muslim schools, and other Muslim institutions in the Netherlands, including several cases of arson. There were also some arson attempts against churches. Thus, in the so-called tolerant Netherlands, there were more attacks in mosques in 1 month than there had been over many decades in the intolerant Israel. Since the 2nd of November 2004, it has become evident that the Netherlands is a confused country. There were many indications of that already after the 2002 murder of the populist leader, Pim Fortuyn, by an extremist from the Dutch animal rights movement. Nowadays, many books and articles are written about the Netherlands' future. The authors are very strong on describing this situation and very weak in proposing solutions. And that, for a problem which probably has no solution, a thought too frightening for the Dutch to think about. While there are many intelligent Dutchmen, intellectual thought is not one of the country's strong points. A famous Dutch proverb expresses this very well, what the Dutch societal standard is. Behave normally, that's already idiotic enough. In retrospective, we can interpret the murder of Van Gogh also by calling it a watershed for multiculturalism. Few Dutch had given much in-depth thought to the immigration issue over the decades. The vague propaganda of many members of the Dutch elite said that if you let people into the Netherlands from many origins, every culture will contribute its best to an enriched society. Well, after the Van Gogh murder, another perspective came to the fore. On numerous occasions, some of the immigrant cultures degrade society in a major way. Many Dutch understood that it was too simple to say that Mohammed Bouyeri murdered because he was just a maniac. Bouyeri had gotten a reasonable school education and he seemed integrated in Dutch society. And though he had radical Muslim friends, it seems that he acted by himself. Yet, the exceptionally cruel murder he committed was linked to the worldview of the radical strands of Islam overall. The reactions in the Netherlands to the mass murders in the United States on 11 September 2001 had already drawn some attention to the highly problematic attitudes of parts of the Dutch Muslim population. Recently, Sylvain Efimenko, a well-known Dutch columnist, recalled that in a poll at that time, 6% of the Dutch Muslims approved of the murder of thousands of civilians in New York and Washington, and about 50% of the Dutch Muslims had an understanding for it. Now, there are about 1 million Muslims in the Netherlands, 350,000 of Turkish origin, 300,000 of Moroccan origin, and that translates into about 50,000 outright supporters of the murderous current of Islam, and on top of that, hundreds of thousands of sympathizers. It is evident that this criminal worldview is not marginal among Dutch Muslims. Despite this, there are still many reality deniers and appeasers among the Dutch elites. Now, the major failures of the Dutch multiculturalism concept are increasingly evident. These have also to be seen in a wider European context. The Netherlands, like many other European countries, are now confronted with the three major strategic mistakes European political leadership has made since the Second World War. The first was that when Europe became rich again in the 1960s, it continued to lean far more than necessary on the American military force to protect itself against the Soviet Union. It did so instead of taking as much as possible responsibility for its own defense. This lack of European responsibility seemingly had no disastrous consequences. Yet, it created a mental state of dependency. That attitude of avoiding responsibility expressed itself also in the second major strategic European mistake, when Europe became over-dependent on oil from Arab and Muslim countries. Europe was rich enough, and it had enough technology to invest in an energy-saving and alternative energy program, but it failed again. And that, in the coming years, may prove disastrous. And now the third major mistake. It was that the Europeans did not want to know themselves. Had they better understood their own attitude toward the European Jews for hundreds of years, they would not have let large numbers of non-Western immigrants in. They would have understood that anti-Semitism is an integral part of European culture. And that, to make clear, however, is something very different than twisting it into saying that most Europeans are anti-Semites. Thus, a new European dependency was now created. Instead of getting their own children, they thought that those of the immigrants would work to pay their pensions. The fact remains that Western Europe could not integrate about 1% of Jewish population over a period of a few hundreds of years, and this while many Jews made major efforts to assimilate into European culture. In the last decades of the 20th century, however, Western Europe has let in many times more non-Western immigrants than there were ever Jews in Europe. And this process has happened over a relatively short time. Many of these immigrants are infinitely more difficult to integrate than the Jews have ever been. This shows up even clearer in the second and third generation. There is another factor which magnifies the problem and makes it structurally almost insolvable: the continuous propaganda of hate and incitement beamed toward the European Muslim community from parts of the Arab and Muslim world, which is repeated in some of the European mosques. There are thus two components which determine the multicultural equation in the Netherlands. On the one hand, xenophobia and racism among part of the Dutch population, and on the other hand, the significant number of immigrants who do not wish to adapt to Dutch culture. The problem is particularly acute among many Moroccan immigrants and their offspring. This has been given even more attention as Van Gogh's murderer Mohamed Bouyeri was the Dutch-born son of Moroccan immigrants. Some recent polls give very interesting indications about that. In July 2005, the Pew Research Center in the United States made a 17-nation study on Islamic extremism. Among the questions was how these 17 societies viewed various religions. In the Netherlands, 85% viewed Jews positively, 83% viewed Christians positively, and 45% viewed Muslims favorably. 51% viewed them unfavorably. Now, this 51% majority negative view of Muslims in the Netherlands indicates how multiculturalism has been fading away among many Dutchmen. There was no other country among the 17 countries in this survey which had a percentage as high as the Netherlands. The closest was China, where 50% of those polled had an unfavorable view of Muslims and only 20% had a favorable view. In Germany, 47% had an unfavorable view, whereas 40% have a favorable view. Now, a more recent poll confirms the Pew findings. It shows that racist taboos in the Netherlands have been definitively broken. 10% of the Dutch call themselves today openly racist. They consider that the Dutch are more intelligent than non-Western immigrants and their children. These people accept discrimination and say clearly, outspokenly, that if any workers have to be fired in a workplace, first the non-Western immigrants should go. Another 17% say that they are racist from time to time, like they eat from time to time. Their stereotype of non-Western immigrants is that they are criminal, impolite, lazy, and intolerant. An even bigger group, half of those polled, say that they dislike Muslims, which is totally in line with the Pew poll of last year. Moroccans are the worst immigrants in their opinion. And what is most interesting, 1/3 of the Dutch who were polled state that they have become more racist in the last few years. And the public mood in the Netherlands has shifted so much since September 11 that the already mentioned columnist Efimenko writes that the results of this Dutch poll are quite reassuring, in view of the fact that 30% of the French are racists. So the Netherlands are much better. The same columnist writes that it is good that there is no poll among Dutch Muslims about the intensity of their racist feelings, as such a poll would not give very positive results. And his opinion is very typical of the country's ostrich policy. The Dutch do not want to know the truth. There are many studies of extreme right-wing racism in the Netherlands, and there is barely anything on minority racism, and in particular Muslim racism, which is at least as big a problem in the Netherlands as right-wing racism. Last year, I asked one Dutch expert on discrimination a totally politically incorrect question. Tell me, I said to her, among the 1,000 most extreme racists in Amsterdam, how many are Moroccans? Well, in private, she gave me an honest answer. She said, 10% of the Amsterdam populations are Moroccans. Their share among the extreme racists is much bigger. So how does all this affect the Jews? Some positive factors of the Muslim immigration were pointed out to me by one Orthodox rabbi who said that the arrival of a large number of religious people in the Netherlands, i.e. Muslims, who are very assertive about their religion, has put religion back to some extent in the public square. That same rabbi, however, also told me how he is regularly insulted by Muslims and others in the street. Once the driver on Amsterdam tramway had to stop his tram and call the police because Muslims in the tram threatened the rabbi. The list of negative impacts on the Dutch Jews due to the influx of many Muslim immigrants is much higher and much longer. First, the number of Muslims at the origin of anti-Semitic incidents in the Netherlands is far larger than their share in the Dutch population. This is particularly true for Moroccans, who represent 2% of the Dutch population, while some estimates put them at the origin of over 40% of the violent anti-Semitic incidents in the Netherlands. Secondly, with the arrival of the Moroccans and the Turks as well, a population has come into the Netherlands from countries where, according to the Pew poll, which I have mentioned, the number of people who have an unfavorable view of the Jews is much bigger than those who have a favorable view. the arrival of a substantial Muslim immigrant population with an overall negative attitude toward Jews has increased the forces demonizing Jews in the Netherlands. Thirdly, Holocaust teaching at a variety of schools has been disturbed by Muslim youngsters. There have also been incidents on National Memorial Day a few years ago and again this year, which were caused by Muslim youngsters. Fourth, the increasing scrutiny of certain religious or ethnic phenomena in the Muslim communities have had negative fallout effects for the Jewish communities as well. For instance, negative opinions on Muslim slaughtering methods, slaughtering left, right and center sheep, have drawn renewed attention to Jewish ritual slaughter. Fifthly, some politicians now wish to abolish private religious schools. The true aim, of course, is they want to abolish Muslim schools. But in the politically correct Netherlands, you cannot say this explicitly. And Jewish schools would thus become an indirect victim of this as well, of, in fact, the hate propaganda in some Muslim schools. Six, intimidation, mainly, but not only by Muslims, has had a negative impact on the public behavior of religious Jews. Jewish school children in Amsterdam are told explicitly by the teachers not to wear kippot on the street. And many Jews lower their profile in various other ways. And there are also consequences for Israel. In order to obtain the votes of the Muslims, some Dutch politicians have taken initiatives against Israel. An extreme case was an attempt by some key members of the Labour Party in Rotterdam to promote an anti-Israel boycott policy before the last elections in 2005. In these local elections, the Labour Party has gotten nationwide the overgreat majority of the Muslim vote in the Netherlands. Many more Muslims have become members of local councils. Some may actively promote anti-Israel positions. The increased Muslim presence in politics doesn't augur well for the Jews or for Israel. Bert Koenders, the Labour Party Speaker on Foreign Affairs in the main chamber of the parliament, has come out in May 2006 in favor of the Netherlands talking to Hamas, which is against government policy. According to the polls, the Labour Party is likely to become, in the 2007 parliamentary elections, the largest faction. In its search for Muslim votes in future elections, we may expect in the coming years more anti-Israel positions from the Labour Party, irrespective of Palestinian terrorism. The Jews have not only disproportionately suffered from the unwise Dutch immigration policies of the last decades and the major minority Muslim racism, the Jews have also fulfilled another function. They have been an indicator of the problems to come for Dutch society. In private conversations and occasionally in the media, Dutch Jews mentioned in 2003 that they expected sooner or later a Jew in the Netherlands to be killed by an immigrant of Moroccan ancestry. Their instinct was right, but factually they were wrong. The first person in the Netherlands to be killed for religious reasons by a Moroccan was not a Jew, but as mentioned, the non-Jew from home. The Jew fulfilled also a third function in Dutch society. The Dutch authorities attach great importance to the Jewish-Muslim dialogue. The concept is that if you bring the two supposedly most opposed communities together, you show that there is hope for the future of the Netherlands. Dialogue in itself is certainly positive, but it has many distorting aspects. First, there is no quarrel between communities. The perpetrators of racist crimes always come from one side, the Muslim one. In racist incidents, several Muslims spat Dutch Jews in the face. The reverse has not happened. Among Dutch Holocaust deniers, Muslims are very much overrepresented. The second reason why this interfaith dialogue has only a very limited meaning is that the Muslims the Jews can dialogue with are not the many problematic ones, as you have heard yesterday from Basel TV. The third reason is that some Jews have the inclination to accommodate Muslims on Israel just in order to keep the dialogue going. In reality, The dialogue, however, is mainly a Muslim need. They are increasingly the community which is viewed very negatively by Dutch society. And the fourth reason is that in order to keep the Jewish dialogue with Muslims alive, Jews are inclined to remain silent about the major anti-Semitism among Dutch Muslims. Some Jews are even actively promoting in Dutch society an idyllic and thus false picture of how happily Jews and Muslims coexisted everywhere in Morocco. Well, you have seen 8% of the Moroccans think favorably about Jews, so the idyll is not that great. The fifth danger is that Jews will be perceived in Dutch societies, where many view Muslims negatively, as the leading defenders of Muslims against discrimination. This cannot be done without Jews mentioning that Jews are also among the prime victims of the major Muslim racism. Now, many of the themes which I have which I have mentioned here briefly, merit development in much greater detail, and I don't have the time frame to do so. To conclude, the academic world doesn't like forecasts. Yet, as Robert said, I don't come from the academic world. I want to make one here. There are many efforts in the Netherlands to foster integration of immigrants and their offspring. And some of them are very good efforts. Education is one important direction. Dialogue is a second one. And this will have a positive influence in the long run. Yet, the ongoing hate promotion by radical Muslims in the Middle East and their many Dutch allies will have negative impacts much faster. In the existing context of xenophobia in the Netherlands, future violence by radical Muslims will accentuate further many of the major failures of Dutch multiculturalism. And finally, the Dutch Jews will have to think much harder on how they can avoid becoming disproportionate victims of this situation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Manfred, for being so concise and comprehensive and all perfectly in the time framework. I overlooked to mention the fact that our centre will be publishing very shortly, actually, within the next month, a study by Manfred of the whole problem of anti-Semitism in the Netherlands today, in the kind of framework that we've been talking about, and there, of course, he sets out many of these points in more detail. The other footnote, just to strengthen the general tone of your remarks, 5 years ago, I spent nearly 6 months at the Royal Netherlands Academy of Sciences in Wassenaar. And I must say, despite the fact that I grew up in Great Britain and therefore was familiar with the art of hypocrisy, until I came to the Netherlands, I didn't realize that there were others who were even more outstanding in this field. And I can only say, despite the fact they were very hospitable, of course, and impeccably multicultural and tolerant, etc., but everything that you suggested and that was running between the lines about political correctness, about denial of reality, and the way that they ignored the obvious, striking, growing problem, and this was just a few years before it all exploded in their faces, was something that I will never forget. I'd now like to introduce our third speaker, whose presentation, I'm sure, not only will fit very well with the two previous ones, but also with last night's screening of the film Obsession regarding radical Islam, because in many ways I think there's a very close connection with what I call the scholarly and intellectual project that Bat Ya'or has been engaged in now for some 30 years, and the underlying themes that were explored in that film. I have known Yאור for a very long time. In fact, I can even say that in some small way, in the early days, I was a contributor to the, as it were, takeoff stage in her early career, because in those days, when I was still in my 20s, I was the editor of a journal in London, and I received one day a manuscript, Yאור writing about the position of Jews and other minorities in the Middle East. And already there were the seeds of the concept, which has become very much associated with her name since then, la dimitude, or the status of Jews and Christians as protected peoples, quote unquote, under Islamic rule. And at that time, this was not at all a concept that was accepted. In fact, I would say that it was very much either ignored, downplayed, or rejected in the conventional scholarship of the time. In fact, I got into a lot of trouble when, as an editor, I published that article, because my boss at the time was none other than Professor Walter Lacoeur. And he just couldn't, I mean, he was a very broad-minded person in many ways, but this was too much. But since then, I'm happy to say that this concept has become more widely accepted, and in no small measure as a result of the writings and research of Yאור, who was born in Cairo, the first point. And secondly, became, through marriage, and I know her husband well, became a British citizen, but lives in Switzerland, which is in many ways perhaps a good vantage point from which to examine some of these issues. I will mention the main works, which I think are relevant to today. The Dhimmi, Jews and Christians under Islam, which appeared originally in French in 1980. The Decline of Eastern Christianity under Islam, from jihad to dhimmitude, which again appeared first in French in 1991, subsequently in English and German. And Islam and dhimmitude, where civilizations collide, in English in 2002. And finally, and most relevant to this morning, the book Eurabia, which appeared first in English, the Euro-Arab Axis, 2005, and there's now a French edition, Eurabia, l'Axe Euro-Arabe. And that is indeed the subject that she's going to be addressing today. And I think that in a way it will provide us also with a conceptual framework for many of the things we have been talking about in the more recent lectures.
Yes, of course. I don't know if you see me. Yes, thank you very much, Robert, for your presentation. And of course, I am very grateful to you. I don't remember these days when I was, I am still, but maybe much less. I was a very rejected, despised, and totally put aside author. And I am grateful to all those who, on these days, helped me, believed in what I have said, among whom, of course, Robert, and this, it had to fight. It provoked some complication for him, especially also that I chose quite a funny name, but Yאור, which means nothing, of course. So I thank very much Robert to have believed in what I was doing in these days. And I don't regret to have been a despised and rejected author, because it forced me to give the best of myself. So I will put what my predecessor said today in a very lively and precise way. I will put it in a framework. I want to say first that the characteristics of current Judeophobia in Europe are very different from what we know from the past times. If I were to define it without fear of words, I would call it a Euro-Arab political and theological replacement doctrine of a genocidal character, whose purpose is to replace the state of Israel by Palestine. Certainly, the European states have never ceased to assure Israel on its safe and recognized borders, as if the 49 armistice lines were safe, and as if the European community had not financed and supported Arafat and the PLO and legitimized them since 1974. The aim of the European was, of course, peace, but peace with Arafat, since Palestinian terrorism had already struck Europe at the end of the 1960s, and peace with Arafat meant probably without Israel. It is Europe that has justified and sanctified the Palestinian cause, that is the vilification of Israel. In other words, the European community used an Orwellian doublespeak reminiscent of the Auschwitz saying, "Work makes free." In fact, the purpose of the European Community Arab policy, followed later by the European Union, was to delegitimize Israel and neutralize its self-defense, especially since the last 5 years, and to through incitement to hate and defamation. However, one can observe some improvement after the several international conferences on anti-Semitism and the publicity given, notably in the USA, to the resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe. Nonetheless, one should be wary of over-optimism, for anti-Semitism is closely linked to the strategic, political, and economic contingencies of Europe's Arab and Muslim policies. So whatever else we do, we won't have an impact on Europe, on European anti-Semitism, because this is linked to the European relationship with the Muslim world. It is also linked to the changed demographic pattern of Europe due to Muslim immigration and to the disintegration of Europe's identity. As we see now, Europe is desperately looking, for instance, to continue funding the Palestinians, whom they have always championed, in spite of their vote for Hamas. Although there are, of course, European anti-Semites, present Judeophobia is not really a phenomenon of persons nor of marginal parties. Rather, it is a political and cultural strategy that embraces all countries of the European Union. It is integrated into this the ideology of this strategy, its institution, network, and cogs, and it is worked out at the highest level of decision-making and implementation. This new Judeophobia is not aimed at individual Jews, at a population that since the Shoah has become marginal and insignificant on demographic and political levels. It is expressed through an implacable and disdainful hate for the state of Israel, for what it represents and stands for, and by the glorification of Palestinianism, which is an ideology for the elimination of the Jews, as in former days of Nazism. This position of the European Union is anonymous, cynical, secretive, and deceitful. In other words, one does not express anti-Jewish racism, one celebrates Palestinianism and its jihadist ideology. There is no point wasting one's money and one's energy in trying to prove the Israel right to exist in the 21st century, or to imagine that this policy stems from ignorance, for it is a coldly calculated program. Europe's anti-Israeli strategy, initiated in the 1970s, will not change. It will continue. It is too late to change. It will continue to its conclusion, the destruction of Europe. For there, finally, is the paradox and the pitfall. This new Judeophobia is in fact inseparable from Europe's long-term policy of fusion with the Arab world, which includes the mass immigration from Muslim countries, with the demographic, sociological, political, and religious changes that come with it. Such changes are not the result of chance, but this is a planned and intended strategy whose unfolding can be followed in the text of the numerous Euro-Arab conferences. I have called this transformation of Europe, Eurabia. Eurabia is not Europe. It is its enemy. It does not represent the majority of Europeans, nor all its politicians. When I speak of Eurabia, I refer to an ideology, like one would speak of communism or of socialism. It is an ideology which is supported by the main European politicians. It is a strategy, a policy, and a culture whose nerve center and way of working are exemplified by the Anna Lindh Foundation in Alexandria, linked to the Swedish consulate. Although this policy can be traced back to the 19th century in France, it was renewed by, in the 1960s by Charles de Gaulle on the European side, on the French side, and on the Arab side by Haj Amin al-Husseini, former Mufti of Jerusalem, whom de Gaulle saved from the Nuremberg trial. Implemented after the Kippur War, this view, this policy and ideology promoted an alliance between the European community and the Arab world, operative at every level of the European community, regionally, that is, for each European member state of the European community, and internationally as a European common foreign and security policy. This vision aimed to create a strategic Euro-Arab world, a Mediterranean world, hostile, of course, to Israel, supporting Arafat and the PLO, and totally opposed to America, in order to create a second pole power in international policy. Without much difficulty, France was able to carry along the rest of Europe, now the 9 countries of the European Community, into its program from 1973, after the Arab oil embargo and after Palestinian terrorism attacked Europe in several European cities. Developed over a period of 3 decades, the Arabian ideology and strategy created a Euro-Arab framework between the EU bodies and its member states on one hand, and the Arab League and its countries on the other hand. This framework is called the Euro-Arab Dialogue. It covers the whole Euro-Arab relationship in strategy, policy, business, social and human affairs, culture and media, implementing bonds, association, solidarity, particularly with the Palestinians, connivance, common projects, with the help of the European Commission and its numerous instruments and funding. Both the policy and this structure are quite unknown to ordinary Europeans. I cannot go into the details here because I explained this strategy in my book Eurabia, but this ideology is explained in numerous dialogue and EU documents, and it is not some invention of my own, some ridiculous conspirational theory that I have invented. It is very well expressed, first of all, here in this little booklet. It is a small review that has appeared in 1975. You see the word Eurabia, which I have not invented, which in this review, this vision of the fusion of Europe and the Arab countries is described. Then you can see here in this important document, which was presented to Romano Prodi in October 2003, you can read the whole program of this Mediterranean fusion, and you can find it on the internet with the map, which shows Europe down and the south, the Arab countries dominating Europe in the north. So this strategy is also explained in a document called the European Common Strategy in the Mediterranean region, which was adopted by the European Council on 19 June 2000 and was published a month later in the official journal of the European Communities. In the 1970s, and this explains what Fiamma said, in the 1970s, the EC, the European Community, and the Arab League went into this association with different but converging aims. Antisemitism and anti-Americanism always existed in Europe, in the Communist Party, in the fascist and the Nazi parties, which represent quite a big population. And this population, this historical background, provided a favorable ground for anti-Semitic and anti-American Arab propaganda. So these forces brought this alliance with the Arab world. Europe thought that by allying itself, the European community thought that this alliance and promotion of the Palestinians would protect Europe from Palestinian terrorism, will guarantee its all need, open to it Arab market, and turn Arab jihadists against Israel and the USA, and that the internationalization of the Palestinian cause would provoke Israel to wither away under a heap of infamy. The twining of Judeophobia and anti-Americanism, as you have said, fitted well into this strategy of the Euro-Arab alliance and is one of its pillars. Of course, the second one is the destruction of the state of Israel, but this is just a smoke screen hiding the Islamization of Christian theology and the subversion of Western values. From their point of view, the countries of the Arab League and the Islamic Conference enter into this alliance because they saw it as a way to divide the West, to weaken America and Europe, to destroy, of course, Israel, to achieve technological parity with Europe, and through the Mediterranean Partnership to set up a vast Euro-Arab demographic, political, and economic and cultural zone. In this way, through multiculturalism and immigration, Islam and Arab culture would be introduced into Europe as a force toward Islamization, and Europe would thereby, through the combined effect of demography, terrorist pressure, and oil, become a continent vassal to world Islam, what it is now. So in this context, multiculturalism, as you have said, is in fact a crucial dimension of the Euro-Arab Strategic Alliance. Since 1975, we see the text of the Euro-Arab meetings and of the EU mentioning the agreements linking Europe to the Arab world and maintaining the particular character and culture of the Arab and Muslim immigrants. This was a very important element. And accepting the development of Arab and Muslim centers to keep the Arab and Islamic identity within Europe. It is within the context of multiculturalism that one must place the cultural jihad with its Judeophobic, anti-American, and anti-Western character. Multiculturalism thus becomes the instrument for the subversion of Western thought aimed at imposing on it Islamic historical perception and thinking, like the negation of the historical jihad, which is replaced by a vision of a defensive rather than an aggressive war, the denial of dimitude presented as the paragon of good governance and tolerance toward non-Muslims, and the justification of Islamic terrorism based on a victimological perception of Muslims, the victims of the Christian West and today of Israel, both bonded together in an essentialist vision of evil. I would like to say a few words on the themes of this cultural jihad, which is waged in all academia in the West. Its aim to replace Israel by Palestine on the cultural and theological level, by negating the existence of Judeo-Christianity, therefore the strengths, the spiritual strengths of Europe. It promotes the Islamization of Christian theology through the Muslim-Palestinian Jesus, which replaced the Jewish Jesus. the return of a Christian replacement theology, what we heard yesterday, Mrs. Briali explaining very well to us. And through this Christian replacement theology, Palestine replaces, of course, Israel. Also, it's developed the theme of the crucifixion of Palestine by Israel, by an Israel born in blood and sin, and the transfer of Jewish history to the Palestinians and the Nazification of Israel. So this is the cultural jihad fought in every academia. Now, to conclude, I would like to say that the new anti-Semitism is situated at the geostrategic level in the Euro-Arab war against Israel. Its themes belong to traditional European Judeophobia, but they are integrated into a context of an ideology of Islamic jihad. And that is why the new Judeophobia bears within it the destruction of the West, of its institution, its culture, and its soul. Thank you.
But Ya'or, of course, means daughter of the Nile, for anybody who didn't know that. And she's always nothing if not challenging and controversial. I'm quite sure there will be some controversy. So let's open the floor straight away. Actually, we had one here, and then we'll have Mitchell Ash. Just start with Professor Shimon.
I have a question which I'd like to address concerning the discussion of the Netherlands to Manfred Gerstenfeld. It's not working. Yeah. Now it is. My question is to Manfred Gerstenfeld.
Just have to get. It is working. It's on.
Does it work? That's
now
it's working. Given the very incisive and very lucid analysis that we've heard, it interests me greatly to know what you would advise the leadership of a jury like the jury of the Netherlands to follow in terms of policy and strategy in relation to multiculturalism and immigration. Can Jews oppose the free immigration? Is the conclusion a kind of Zionist conclusion that you have no future because the analysis shows where everything is going? What should the leadership of such a community do in relation to your analysis of the situation?
My question also is addressed to you, Dr. Gerstenfeld, so perhaps I might be permitted to ask it now. And then you can respond perhaps to both of us. It's quite closely related to my colleague's question. 2 points. The first refers to the roots of Dutch multiculturalism, which are not only in leftist ideology, and I think we need to hear more about that, about the historical past of this. Just in a few words, the Dutch have the ideology called Verzeilen, which Verzeilen meaning columns, societal columns. The idea of parallels, put it in very few words, very, very parallel societies, Catholic and Protestant, which was the Dutch response to the religious wars of the 17th century. That, I think, is quite fundamental for understanding the Dutch approach to all of these things, because there was a belief already for hundreds of years in Dutch society that you could establish parallel universes and tolerate one another, and everything would be just fine. So that I think that's an important point to emphasize. The second aspect of the roots of all of this are the returning peoples from the colonized countries. I think we really haven't paid enough attention to this yet, because we've been so focused on Islamic and Arab immigration. In the case of Holland, of course, it's the Indonesians primarily. And one might put it here quite pointedly, for the sake of brevity, before the Moroccans, there were the Moluccans. The Moluccans were the source of criminality 20 years ago in Dutch society. And I find it interesting and worth asking you to comment on whether this might be seen as a precedent for some of the things we're now experiencing, or if it wasn't, why not, at the time. But my third point is related to my colleague's question. And I want to ask the same question, but much more broadly than he did. I don't just want to ask about what Jews should do in Holland. I think we need to ask more specifically, and this is actually not just a question to you, but to the entire conference. Given the weaknesses of multiculturalist utopias, and I think really we don't, I think this is really quite common now to emphasize these. I think we need to get beyond that because, it's easy to hammer on the leftist utopias of multiculturalism now. That's too easy. We need to make it a little harder for ourselves and ask, what are we going to do about it? Is it now your policy recommendation to expel the Muslims from the Netherlands? I mean, I don't mean to be polemical. I want to ask this question in all seriousness. Do you want to end multiculturalism? Is that the answer? If it isn't, what is?
Well, these are a lot of very good questions, difficult to answer briefly. What should Dutch Jewry do, which both of you asked? Well, let's first understand what is Dutch Jewry. The 40,000 Jews in the Netherlands take off 10,000 so-called father Jews, people who have a Jewish father, who float somewhere around the community because they are not considered Jewish by any of the two communities and not Reform. If in Dutch Reform Jewry you have to convert if your father is a Jew, but they float around the margins. So we're down to 30,000. Take off 10,000 foreign Jews, Israelis mainly, some Russians, a few hundred Iranians and Iraqis. They also float in the margins. The Israelis you can see in masses in the Portuguese synagogue on Yom Kippur. So that is also a separate community. We're now down to 20,000. Now, the Dutch organized Jewry claims that there are 8,000 organized Jews. In my opinion, that includes substantial double counting, but that is what there is. The others are also Jewish in some way. They may not even deny that, but it's difficult even for a Jew like myself, a Dutch Jew, to recognize them. So we are down to 8,000 people. Dutch Jewry for all the Dutch surface of the Netherlands is 33,000 square kilometers. For all practical purposes, during the week, Dutch Jewry exists on 30 square kilometers. That is the southern part of Amsterdam and the suburb of Amstelveen. If you want to go to a synagogue outside during the week, there are two services on Monday morning and Thursday morning in one synagogue in Scheveningen. Religious Jewry during the week doesn't function in the Netherlands. A school here, a school there, a trip by the Wietzo to some other, but the Dutch Jewry is on 1,000th of the square of the surface of the Netherlands. That's where Dutch Jewry is. What does it do? Well, in fact, it sins itself out all the time. Many of the leaders say when we are old, we'll leave the Netherlands, we want our children to leave. It is diluting. Chabad, of course, is eternal, like its leader, and and that will stay there ever. Policy, Dutch Jewry has its great merit that it is a very socially conscious Jewry. It has, thanks to the verzuiling, it has all the institutions for social affair. It has no political insight whatsoever. The things I have said here, and there are some guests from the Netherlands, are total anathema to them. They haven't a clue. They haven't a clue of the dangers of the dialogue. That's really what I say here. What should they do? Obviously, they'll partly vote with their feet, they'll assimilate further, they'll lower their profile, and a few will say the truth. Now, the bigger question, what should the Netherlands do? Let's finish off with small question. No, the Indonesians were not a problem. Most of them were either Dutch or mixed marriages, Christians, and they did not pose a religious problem. The Moluccans from Ambon, 40,000 Moluccans, were also Christians. In fact, they were the allies of the Dutch in fighting, because the Dutch had no manpower to colonize Indonesia. I mean, we're speaking here about a country today at 200 million inhabitants. The Dutch were 60 million. They had a few 100,000 people there on all these thousands of islands. You barely could put a Dutchman on every island. So they had local allies, and the Moluccans were some of this. Moluccans wanted to have their own state at home. They had no real, part of them were criminal, but they had, their problem is different, and today it is considered largely solved. The next generations, as far as I see, have integrated in the Netherlands. They also didn't have the language problems. So now the so-called alloctoons, which is an untranslatable Dutch word, which is everybody who is not born in the Netherlands till the 100th generation, if he came in the last 50 years, which goes even further than the Tanach's expression on the Ammonites and the Moabites. So once an alloctone, for eternity, your offspring remains alloctonic. So we really have two categories. One is the million Muslims, and the other are the people from the West Indies, which means, on the one hand, the Antilles and Suriname. Look, they are not a major problem because they speak Dutch. Part of them, so their problem is not so much cultural integration, the problem is integration because part of them, in particular from the Antilles, are extremely violent and criminal. But that comes under the broader heading of immigrant criminality. That doesn't come under the fact that they do not want to integrate. They just want to integrate in the criminal part of the Netherlands. But okay, I mean, society is multi-layered. Look, it's a great advantage that there are so few intellectuals in the Netherlands because you can, as a single person, know most of them because we speak under about 10 minors. One of the really, in my mind, better brains of the Netherlands is a man called Bolkestein, former European Union Commissioner, who is the only European Union Commissioner, by the way, who voted against Turkey's adherence to in the Prodi Commission. He was the only one who voted against the adherence of Turkey to Europe. At the time, that was still fashionable. He was apparently, and he has been ahead of his time many times. He made a remark which obviously was racist because it was true. He said, there are 100,000 Hindus in the Netherlands. We don't hear about the problem of Hinduism with the Dutch. Finkelkraut, of course, said a very nasty thing in France, which was also true. There are also Vietnamese, he said, and Chinese who are poor, and Portuguese who are poor in France. Why didn't they participate in the riots of October and November? So the problem is, and that is something which people don't dare to say, and I wonder whether I would dare to say it if I weren't an Israeli and had my own land and lived in the Netherlands as a small minority. The problem comes out of Islam. And I disagree with Bassam Tibi, who said yesterday that there is Islamism on the one hand and other Islam on the other hand. This is a continuous flux. The Pew study shows that in many countries 60% have some sympathy for bin Laden. Well, if you have some sympathy for a criminal like bin Laden, then I have great doubts about where Islam exactly stands and not Islamism. So the problem comes out of Islam, the problem comes out of the beaming of endless hatred, which we have seen last night on the movie, of endless hatred from the Islamic world. Joel Kotick will soon speak here. The cartoons he will show and I know more or less what he'll show.
I asked about solutions.
Solutions. Solutions are, Balkenstein has given the very clear answer. Solutions are, stop immigration. You have already too many immigrants, because you cannot integrate them, stop immigration. Secondly, force them to speak Dutch. Make it a necessity to speak Dutch. Thirdly, try to create a leadership. Morgen Islam in the Netherlands has no leadership. Now, fourthly, there are no solutions. Now, wait a moment, and that is the crux of the story. In the Middle East, I'll conclude with that. In the Middle East, the European idea was, we Europeans are advanced, enlightened, we have learned from the Second World War. Now we live peacefully together, we have human rights, we are charitable. In the Middle East, there are some backward nations, the Israelis. They haven't yet understood how to live with their neighbors as we so brilliantly have lived. And we will teach them how to save them from themselves. The great lesson of the last 2-3 years has been that Israel has learned one lesson living with the Palestinians with whom you cannot deal, is that and that every basic professional strategist knows that in a situation where there is no solution, you muddle through. Israel is the leading nation in the world as far as understanding and inventing on how to muddle through in a situation where there is no solutions. The Europeans are only beginning to learn now. So it is not that Israel is 60 years behind the Europeans. The Europeans are 60 years behind Israel. And they will have to learn to muddle through, and that is the solution.
I always get a bit worried when I hear that solution, muddling through. You know, I studied the history of Austria-Hungary, and it was the favorite solution of the Austro-Hungarian bureaucrats. Fortwursteln, to muddle through, and then it all collapsed. But of course, that was the beginning of the First World War. Joe Kotick.
So I was very interested by, of course, by the explanation about Italy and especially about Holland, because it seems to be that the Dutch case is more or less like the Belgian case. And I would say in a sense the Belgian case in advance. When you speak the trouble that we have, we the Jew who come from a left, origin, family, etc., and the abandonment of the Jew, the loneliness of the Jew, and especially from the left. And the trouble is that, and this I think is going to be the French problem in the future years, the fact that the Socialist Party will have a strategy. They're not anti-Semite. They just want to have the Muslim votes, because the problem is demography. And they just have the Muslim vote. You don't have to be anti-Semite to be anti-Israeli, unfortunately, no. You will be even a radical anti-Zionist, because the problem of a politician now, and not on a state man, it means is to win elections. And unfortunately, the socialists, and unfortunately it seems to be the case in Holland, will appeal more and more to the Muslim vote. So I think it's complex, and of course the solution, it's very difficult, and I think it's very pessimistic. Speaking about the third, I would say that, and I'm a very provocative man. Those people doesn't know me, they will know it now. I think Mrs. Batior, I think you should have titled your conference, The Protocol of the Wise of Brussels. Because your explanation of, I've been working in Brussels, I'm giving a lecture on European construction. I think it's a conspiracy theory. It seems to be like, people in Brussels, totally separate from their own people, had decided suddenly, and we don't know why, that Europe will be within the next decade Eurabia. Why? Bolkenstein, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, all together, they had Paul-Henri Spaak, they were anti-Americans. I think first you have to study European history, European construction. And then I think to avoid those kind of politics is complex. And of course, your explanation is so simple that maybe in a sense we would have, that's it. It's a plot. They want us to become Muslim. Christianity will become a kind of new Muslim heresy. Okay, why not? But unfortunately, it's more complex than this.
I'd like to if there's another question for Batya, or we could take that now, or I'll give a chance to respond immediately. So if there isn't, you want to ask something to Batya or?
Just a comment.
To Batya or? Okay.
Just a comment about Yאור. I think that what you said is simple but not simplistic. And what you say is very deep because we see a strong enforcement of your understanding from the Palestinian Christian direction in this land, which influences Europe very strongly.
I'd like to ask, what advice do you have for the Israeli government and also Israeli business people and anyone who's interested in really fighting but they feel impotent and they don't know what to do? How would you suggest, through the KISS method, you know the KISS method, keep it sweet and simple, that it would be effective and help to turn over the fact that we have a good product, lousy packaging, and we don't know what to do about it?
Thank you. Well, I like, of course, a provocative question, but not simplistic question. So, of course, politics is complicated and very complex, but in the short time I had, I could not go into all the details, and I had to put it in a simple form. But I have, after all, written a book of more than 300 pages on the politics of Eurabia and given the documents there. And probably this gentleman was there in Brussels, but he doesn't know, since Brussels, the body of the European Union is so vast, and we know it is in Brussels, but also in Strasbourg, so maybe he doesn't know everything. So, nevertheless, to prove the exactitude of my analysis, we just have to go to the internet and find the documents. There's a lot of documents which express and design this policy. It is written in the several Euro-Arab dialogue forum here that this one was lately called in Paris in April 2006. I don't know if you bothered to go there. No, you don't live in Paris.
I live in Paris.
Okay. Have you been there?
Consider those meetings as a Zionist plot because Israel is in it.
Yeah, of course. Yes, to be hidden. This is why Israel is in it. To be boycotted. Because we hear in the Euro-Arab dialogue, we see the demand of the Arab delegate who ask for the boycott of Israel. And we see how this is carried on in Europe. In fact, the European Union is just applying the Arab demand, the Arab policy, because Europe, as it has been stated, don't have an army and cannot defend itself. So this vision of an alliance with the Arab world is in fact to protect itself from an Arab aggression. And the same with the idea of bringing Turkey into the fold of Europe is in the hope of disarming Islamic fundamentalists in Turkey and encourage the secular movement in Turkey. Here, for instance, the objective, I will quickly translate it to you, the objective of this Euro-Arab Dialogue Forum. There were plenty of them. There are lots of such forums. And this is in order. This was done with Solana, with Amr Moussa. It had to have the president of the European Community. It is on the highest level, and it had to have also Chirac, but at the last time Chirac didn't go. So it was the objective in French was to relaunch the Euro-Arab dialogue, and in order to open new strategic perspective, in order to constitute a future bilateral pole of international equilibrium and create a new world order. So this is with the Arab countries. Europe, because it is Europe, Euro-Arab. It is on the level of Europe. It is not one country. The level of Europe with the Arab countries, the Arab world. So probably this is a conspirational theory to say that they want to create a new Euro-Arab world order. So then what to do with that? Well, I have said, and it was said so much before me, that one feels totally impuissant. How do you say? Powerless, because it is not something, first of all, that the European knows. Secondly, that the European wants. They don't know this type of big policy and strategy. And secondly, you find yourself faced to a wall of refusal, denial. This was said yesterday also. It is a denial. And my friend Shmuel Trigano expressed very well this feeling of powerless in his book on the future of the Jews in France, but it can be said in Europe. That one cannot, the Jews try to went and complain about anti-Semitism, but it was denied. It was said, no, we are inventing. There is no anti-Semitism in Europe. Prodi said it, there is no anti-Semitism in Europe. So this is because Europe doesn't want to change its policy with the Arab world. So what can we do? What we have to do what we have done already, always, to fight and to denounce it. And this is it, and hope that we can survive like that. But we must not let our arms down and say we cannot do anything. We have to fight it by saying it, by denouncing it.
I take one more question, particularly if it could be directed to Fiamma, because I'd like her to conclude.
It is directed to Fiamma. May I speak from here?
There's no microphone here. There's no microphone now? Or it would be better
Fiamma can hear me.
No, everyone can hear you. But still, it's for the record. As they say, it's for the record.
Fiamma, thank you, as always, for a very good talk. If I understood your conclusions correctly, but tell me if I did not, please, you said that we cannot fight anti-Semitism on its own terms, but we really have to return Europeans to a sense of Europe. More or less correct? If it's correct, if that premise is correct, then I would like to know who, in your estimation, is in fact, among the intellectuals in Europe, Italy in particular, engaged in that struggle of returning Europeans to a sense of Europe. And perhaps within the context of your answer, you might say a word or two about Oriana Fallaci.
It's a general comment. I think we have to understand that in Europe there is a process of construction of an empire. And this empire is undemocratic because against the will of the European people and a bureaucratic construction. And this empire has a will of power, an enormous will of power, because the frontier of Europe was uncertain. Turkey, the frontier could be, might be Iraq, and in the south, the Sahara, and so this is it is an ideology what Europe became, and it was evident during the last years when there was a Euro-Arab axis against the United States of America and Israel also. We felt that, and we heard politician leaders, especially in France. I have a list of all their quotations from the left to the right, who were very happy of this new fusion between the immigrants, the Arab immigrants, and the European masses against the states, but also against Israel, because all the demonstrations, Israel and the states were assimilated, and it was difficult for the Jews to breathe in such an atmosphere. So the problem was how to understand the abandonment of the Jews. It was very strong, this feeling was very strong in 2001 and 2002, but today is less important. But we understood very primitively, perhaps, that simply Europeans chose to be on the side of the Arabs, and the Jews and Israel were an obstacle to their will of power, to their extension, geographical extension of the area of influence. We were inside Europe the main obstacles because we were European citizens. The external obstacle was the state of Israel, which was linked by history with Europe, but which was not accepted by the Arab world. What happened inside the political sphere of European states because of the electoral influence of the citizens of Arab origin happened in the external scene of the international relations. Europe had to renounce to defend Israel in order to be accepted and supported by the Arab states against the United States. It's very simple to understand.
First, just a word to you. No, I mean, but Yao never talk about conspiracy. This is simply a word that she did not use. So why put it in her mouth? No, it's always a mistake to make people say what they did not say, because she speaks of a general politics, a general feeling, which is the one that Trigano described now and that I tried to explain to her. She doesn't speak about conspiracy.
Of course she does. Of course she does. We're politicians.
Okay, that's.
You know, we can
I also, so I'm a journalist, but it happens to me to be an academic too. So what you talking about? Don't put it on this very low level, you know. I am academic, so what? I mean, I'm sorry for you. So what's the point? Now, I want to say a couple of things. Intellectuals are the worst, the worst point in all of this story, you know. It never happened before to see such a wide gap between ideology, European academic, journalistic, press houses, movie makers, ideology related to people, general discourse. Because when you speak with the taxi driver, he knows much better that the situation is problematic, that the immigrants can bring problem. He doesn't hate them, at least in Italy. In Italy, there is not this patent racism. It's not there. There is a preoccupation. No, there is no that this racist. Maybe in France there is. Italy is not this kind of country. It's a different kind of country from this
You
point.
talk to different taxi drivers than I do, bro.
Fiamma talks in Italian to them. It's a big difference.
Once, yes, I met one that because I was Jewish wanted me to go out of the. He recognized me from the television. He wanted me to go out of the taxi. This
Maybe
happened.
your politics, maybe that too.
Well, I don't make any politics. I write books, you know. But what do you have against me? I have nothing against you, you know. Okay, so let's.
Conspiracy theory.
Eh?
Conspiracy theory.
Conspiracy theory?
Yours.
Mine? Did you read my book sometimes? Oh, yes, really? Oh, I will interrogate you, okay? Good. Okay, then there has never been such a wide gap that has to be filled, so this is my first call. I would like to have a regroupment of European intellectuals to discuss from time to time, from France, from Italy, from England, and wherever else.
United States?
To write, well, look, we are speaking now about the problem of Europe, of course, with the United States, but we do that all the time. United States don't have the problem that we have. Maybe Canada has a similar problem. It's still different from ours. I think that when Finkelkraut said what he said about the riots in Paris, he was simply expressing what everybody knew. Well, there was nothing more close to the common sense than that. Still, he was accused, condemned, described as a criminal. So I think that we should try to have a stronger connection and a deeper ability to elaborate together as Europeans, because an European common thought is missing, and it is very important to have one. Now, there is another thing that I would like to say, which is not an answer to other questions, but just a point that I wanted to make. The Israeli issue is the only unifying issue for all the left, you know? That's very, very important because I can see this in Italy now. We have a government with the left-wing coalition that has been voted and it has all the right of governing. They're not able to find a single common line on any question because they are very different between each other. There are social democrats and there are tough communists that call themselves Communist Party. There are two, by the way. So there are people that has gone. For instance, our foreign minister, I think he's been the last one to go and see Arafat and La Mucata in the last period of his life. He has been, I think, one of the very last one. And one of the person that is directing the Foreign Affairs Commission has gone and seen Nasrallah and found him very interesting, and the Hezbollah very interesting group. This is. But on the other side, inside the left, there are people that think that the existence of Israel, not only it's absolutely legitimate, but it has to be defended too. And it's very hard for them to find a unifying point. But they will find one. They will find one, and it will be on Israel. It will be either denying the Itnachut program from the West Bank of Olmert because it's not a point of meeting with the Palestinians and it doesn't satisfy. But anyhow, the point will be always land for peace. Land for peace and land for peace. That will be the point. Now, I want to remind you, and with this I will stop because from here could start a very long talk again. Bettino Craxi, his program of Bettino Craxi, I suppose all of you heard about him. He's the one that died in Tunis and was a very close friend of Arafat. He has been our prime minister for a long time, and then he fell in something that I think was partly true and partly a trap, you know. So anyhow, he died in exile because he's a tragic figure after all, and I'm not here to judge Bettino Craxi, but I want to tell you something. Bettino Craxi, his main dream was to dig the thumb for the Communist Party, because he wanted to substitute a sort of social democrat idea to the Communist Party, and he made a inter-Atlantic policy until it came to the point of the Palestinian. Here there is the big gap. He found again his leftist virginity, third internationalist attitude, just in recovering a relationship with Arafat, with the Palestinian. And if you remember the episode of Sigonella, which was the most important, maybe, the episode of Sigonella was related to the kidnapping of the Achille Lauro ship. You remember the kidnapping of the ship? Then the terrorists were put on an airplane. The Americans wanted to take them because they had killed an American. And Bettino Craxi went to Sigonella and saved them. Took them to an Italian jail from where they were promptly released very quickly. So that was the story, and he showed it as a very big point. Well, doing this, he saved his relationship with the left. And it has always been a very, very main point. The Middle East, Arab question is not a collateral point. It is not the comma, I would say, in Italian. I don't know how you would call it, a comma, a little part of general politics. It is the general politics. It's the symbol of the general politics. It's the most important. Is the most important politics in all the foreign affairs politics of a state. So this is what is going to happen even now with the new government. We will see what it is. The first thing that Romano Prodi did, he gave an interview to Al Jazeera where he said that he found Hamas very interesting. And the second thing was Massimo D'Alema, that expected to be the foreign minister of Italy, declaring that Hamas was something to be looked at and whatsoever. So we don't have to put this problem down. This problem is very, very central. It is. Okay,
I knew that when we would have Fiamma, Nirenstein and Yאור, and also a Dutchman on our panel, that the sparks would fly. And indeed they have. We, of course, have run over our time. We have to consider we shouldn't begin immediately, which is what I would prefer, rather than take any break, that we've just moved straight to the next panel. All I would say to my good friend Joel Kotek is there's one difference between the protocols of the elders of Zion, or the sages of Zion to be precise, and the protocols of Eurabia. The former are known to have been a fabrication. The latter, the protocols of Eurabia, are available, widely available to be read. So it's a matter of interpretation. And clearly, the interpretations here were very different. Anyway, I would suggest that we move on straight away, and that the participants in the next panel would come forward. 5 minutes. We'll give 5 minutes.
Oh, give me a Thank you. No, thank you. Gideon.
How are you?